Welcome to Self-Powered Healing. I'm Barbara McNeely, your host and the creator of Self-Powered Healing, where we're talking about how you can unleash your innate healing ability. This is the final week of National Podcast Post Month, or as we like to call it, NaPodPoMo. Coming up this week, just before the end of the month, I have a healing story for you. You do not want to miss it. In today's episode of Self-Powered Healing, I want to talk about a theory I've heard for disease. It's actually a statement, just a few words. It says, all disease comes from spiritual sickness. I heard it from my favorite health coach, Andrea Beeman, who heard it from one of her own mentors. But is it true? Well, maybe. I'm not really crazy about absolutes, so that term all is a little bothersome to me. In fact, I'll give you some notable exceptions at the end of this episode. But let's look at what it means. What do we mean by spiritual sickness? We are not just our body, we are mind, body, and spirit, all of it intertwined and each one impacting the other. So, what we think can shape our reality, and how we feel in mind and spirit can impact our health. It might be that you're holding grudges, or maybe you're harboring hate for someone, or holding on to old hurts and angers. Or it could be if we're in a state of fear. And if you haven't noticed, much of advertising today is based on fear. Either it's FOMO, or fear of missing out, or a fear that you'll catch a disease if you don't get the latest vaccine. We can also be impacted by the memory of older traumas, which could be from a loss or from abuse, especially any type of childhood abuse or trauma. And to a child, especially, trauma is how something is perceived. It may not look like trauma to everyone. And I just want to be clear about one thing. That statement, all disease comes from spiritual sickness, does not mean it's all in your head. And it does not mean you made it up. It's not about hypochondria. I'll be honest, it wasn't that many years ago that I didn't believe this was possible. My background is science. I majored in biology, and it's been a long road and a lot of relearning to change how I look at disease. I've had to retrain my brain on much of this. For many years, I believed that the science was all that impacted us, that the chemical reactions that make up life and keep us healthy and alive were all that influenced our health, that if you ate well and exercised, that you would be healthy. But the evidence just doesn't really support that. Doing all the right healthy things, eating a healthy diet, getting exercise, etc., isn't always enough. Some people still get sick. And the opposite can be true. Those who don't seem to take care of themselves are still healthy. They're not getting sick. Here's a scientific case for all disease comes from spiritual sickness. When we hold on to those emotions, such as anger or hatred, or when the memories of old traumas haunt us often, we can wind up in a constant state of fight, flight, stress response. In that stress response, our body is preparing us to either fight or flee. That response was designed to help us get out of danger. What that response does is it releases chemicals into our bloodstream. It releases cortisone, adrenaline, glucose, among others. All of those chemicals act to give us the energy we need to be able to move quickly. But we're only designed to be in that state for maybe 30 minutes at a time. And we need about 72 hours to recover from that. Which means if we're in that state much of the time, we never recover. So the stress response will increase our pulse and blood pressure, and it also releases glucose into our bloodstream to give us energy. It also shuts down our digestion, growth, reproduction, and our immune system because you're not going to need those when you're in danger. But when we stay in that fight or flight mode, we can wind up with illness due to poor digestion, a weakened immune system, as well as that increased blood pressure and excess blood sugar. So it really isn't that difficult to see the truth in that statement that all disease or most disease comes from spiritual sickness. The idea of trauma as an illness creator or cause is becoming more and more important in our world as we begin to see those relations that we've ignored for years between the body and the mind and the spirit. It turns out that trauma will be found to be the root cause of many of our current modern illnesses. Some say as much as 70, 80, even 90%, and a few dare say 100%. When we talk about trauma, we have to understand that what looks like trauma to you may not look like trauma to me or to someone else. It's all in how it's perceived and how the person, especially a child, relates to that incident that causes the trauma. Plus, past traumas can often influence our reactions to similar traumas. Does all disease come from spiritual sickness? I would say maybe. I'm not big on the absolutes. I try to avoid words like all and always and never. They can get us into trouble. I do believe the statement has a lot of merit. So I might say that much disease comes from spiritual sickness. And in the next episode, I'll be talking about some evidence to show that. But I wanted to leave you with a few exceptions. There are some, especially in our modern world. We're exposed to toxic substances and electromagnetic radiation on a daily basis. And we also have to navigate a world full of less than healthy foods and drugs that may cause more harm than good, and iatrogenic illness. Some of these effects can be mitigated by practicing self-powered healing, but not all. Other notable exceptions include exposures during war, where soldiers are exposed to Agent Orange, radiation, mustard gas, and other toxins. And those result in chronic illnesses that sometimes lead to death. Furthermore, the first responders from 9/11 were exposed to a lot of toxic substances. And 23 years later, many of them are still very sick. And I would add any situation where there's a radiation spill or a toxic spill of some sort. Those are all examples of illnesses that probably did not come from anything within the spirit. Thanks for listening today. You can visit selfpoweredhealing.com/November 2024 to find all the episodes for NaPodPoMo. Leave a comment too if you like. Thank you to all that have been a part of this 30-day challenge. Beginning in December, I'll be returning to my less intense schedule, publishing 3 episodes each month at least. I also will have more healing stories coming up. Stay tuned. By the way, Self-Powered Healing is still looking for interviews with people who want to share a story of healing. Do you have a healing story? I would love to hear about it and see if maybe you could share it on our show. So if you're interested in sharing, then visit selfpoweredhealing.com/share to schedule a chat. You aren't committing at this point. You're just having a chat with me to see what your story is about. It will be confidential unless or until you decide you want to share. And if you get there and there's not a convenient time for you, send me a message because we'll always find a time. And remember this always. You are a magnificent being with powerful, innate healing abilities.